I took the summer camp counselor job because I needed money fast. The listing made it sound easy. 3 weeks in the woods, decent pay, meals included, no cell service distractions, and a chance to help shape unforgettable childhood memories. That's exactly how they phrased it. At the time, I was 22, broke, and trying to recover from getting kicked out of my apartment after my roommate disappeared with 2 months of unpaid rent. So when Camp Blackridge accepted me almost immediately, I didn't ask many questions. Looking back now, I probably should have. The camp sat deep in northern Vermont, hidden between miles of dense pine forest and a blackwater lake. It took nearly 4 hours of driving after leaving the highway before I finally reached the entrance. The sign looked older than the road itself. Welcome to Camp Blackridge. Some of the letters had fallen off. The counselor orientation was strangely short. There were only 6 of us hired for the summer. Most camps usually had dozens. The director, a tall man named Richard, greeted us in the mess hall. He was probably in his late 60s, thin as a skeleton, with pale skin that looked almost gray under the lights. He smiled constantly, but never warmly. "There are a few important rules," he told us. "The children are never to leave their cabins after lights out. If you hear whistling in the woods after midnight, do not investigate it. If a child claims someone is standing outside their cabin window, you reassure them and keep the curtains closed." He said all of this casually, like these were perfectly normal rules. One of the other counselors laughed nervously and asked if the camp had a history of bears. Richard didn't laugh back. "No," he said quietly. "Not bears." That was the first moment I considered leaving, but I stayed. The campers arrived the next afternoon, around 40 kids total, mostly between 10 and 14 years old. I was assigned cabin 7 with another counselor named Melissa. The first 2 days were normal enough. Archery, hiking, canoeing, campfire songs. The usual summer camp stuff, but the kids started mentioning strange things almost immediately. One boy named Ethan told me he woke up during the night and saw a tall man standing between the trees outside the cabin. Another camper swore someone had been walking across the roof after midnight. Melissa brushed it off as kids trying to scare each other. I tried to believe that too. Then came the whistling. The first time I heard it, I was lying awake around 1 in the morning. It sounded distant at first, a slow, uneven whistle somewhere deep in the woods. Not a song, not random either. Just some notes, then silence, then the same notes again. I sat up in bed, listening to it echo through the trees. A few seconds later, one of the campers whispered from the bunk across the cabin. "He's back." I asked what he meant, but the kid pulled his blanket over his head and refused to answer. The whistle continued for nearly an hour. The next morning, everyone acted normal. Except Ethan. He looked exhausted, pale and distracted. During breakfast, he suddenly asked me something that made my stomach drop. "Why was that man watching our cabin last night?" I asked him what man. "The one with no face." I actually laughed when he said it, mostly because it caught me off guard. But Ethan didn't smile. "He was standing beside the trees," he continued. "He whistled at me." That night, Melissa and I decided to stay awake. At exactly 12:43 a.m., the whistling started again, closer this time. The kids heard it too. Several woke up immediately. Melissa walked to the window and peeked through the curtain. Then she froze. I remember the exact way her body stiffened, like every muscle locked at once. "What is it?" I whispered. She didn't answer. Slowly, without taking her eyes off the window, she backed away from it. Then she whispered something so quietly, I barely heard it. "There's someone out there." The cabin went silent. Even the kids stopped moving. I walked toward the window carefully, expecting to see another counselor trying to prank us. Instead, I saw a figure standing just beyond the trees. Tall. Unnaturally tall. At least 7 feet. Its body was thin and motionless, partially hidden between the pines. And even from that distance, I could tell something was wrong with its face. There wasn't one. The skin where the eyes and mouth should have been looked smooth and pale, stretched tight across its head like wet cloth. Then it whistled again. 3 notes, louder now. One of the children started screaming. The figure tilted its head slightly toward the sound, and then it moved. Not running, not walking normally. Its body jerked violently between the trees in sudden, unnatural motions, almost like frames missing from a video. Melissa slammed the curtains shut immediately. The kids were crying now. One kept yelling that it was trying to come inside. Then we heard footsteps outside the cabin, slow, crunching through gravel, circling us. I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the door, but Melissa physically stopped me. "Don't open it," she whispered. The footsteps stopped directly outside. Then came 3 knocks, slow, heavy. A voice followed, soft at first. "Let me in." Every kid in that cabin started panicking because the voice sounded exactly like Ethan's. But Ethan was standing right beside me. The knocking continued for almost 10 minutes, then silence. Eventually, the whistling returned deeper into the woods, growing quieter and quieter until it vanished completely. None of us slept that night. The next morning, Richard gathered all the counselors before breakfast. He looked furious. "Did anyone open the cabin door last night?" he asked. None of us answered. He stared at us for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Good," he said. "Then we still have time." I asked him what that thing was. For the first time since arriving, Richard looked genuinely afraid. He told us Camp Blackridge had been built in the 1960s over the remains of an abandoned settlement. According to local stories, something lived in the forest long before the camp existed. Something that copied voices. Something that whistled to lure people outside. Most importantly, he said it could not enter unless invited. I asked him if he actually believed that. He looked directly at me and said something I still think about constantly. "I didn't believe it either," he said. "Until the summer of 1987. That night, 3 counselors quit immediately. By morning, they were gone. Or at least that's what Richard claimed, because their cars were still parked outside the main lodge. The following night was worse. The whistling began before sunset. Cabin doors rattled across the camp after midnight. Some of the kids claimed they saw people standing between the cabins, even though all counselors were accounted for. Around 2 in the morning, the power went out completely. That's when someone started banging on our cabin windows, hard. Violent impacts shook the glass while children screamed inside the darkness. Then came Melissa's voice from outside. "Open the door." But Melissa was standing beside me, holding my arm so tightly, it hurt. The voice outside kept calling my name, begging now, crying. "Please let me in." The banging became frantic. The windows shook so hard I thought they would shatter. And then suddenly, everything stopped. Complete silence. No insects, no wind, nothing. I slowly pulled back the curtain beside the door. At first, I saw only darkness. Then I noticed someone standing inches from the glass, watching me, its blank face pressed against the window, motionless, smiling. Or at least I think it was smiling. The skin where its mouth should have been stretched upward unnaturally, creating folds across its faceless head. And then it whispered, not through the window, not outside, directly behind me. "Can I come in?" I turned instantly. Nobody was there, but one of the cabin doors was open, just slightly. I never saw Ethan again after that night. Richard told the campers his parents had picked him up early, but his backpack remained under his bunk for the rest of the summer. And sometimes, late at night, after the whistling stopped, I could hear his voice somewhere deep in the woods outside Cabin 7, calling for help. The camp shut down permanently 2 years later. Officially, they blamed financial issues, but last October, curiosity got the better of me. I drove back to the property alone. Most of the buildings had collapsed. The cabins were rotting apart, swallowed by weeds and vines. The lake looked darker than I remembered. I found Cabin 7 eventually. The door was hanging open. Inside, everything was covered in dust except for one thing: fresh, muddy footprints leading from the back wall towards the doorway. As I stood there staring at them, I heard something behind the trees. 3 short whistles, exactly the same as before. I got back in my car immediately, but while driving away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, and standing beside the old camp sign, there was someone watching the road, tall, motionless, waiting. I worked at a summer camp called Pine Hollow for 3 consecutive summers. The camp sat in the middle of a national forest in northern Michigan, surrounded by endless miles of pine trees and abandoned logging roads that hadn't been used in decades. Most people imagine summer camps as cheerful places filled with campfires, canoe races, and kids singing songs around a lake. Pine Hollow was like that during the day. At night, it felt like a completely different place. The strange incidents started during my second summer working there. According to the camp director, a counselor had disappeared the previous year. Officially, he had quit unexpectedly and left in the middle of the night. That was the explanation given to both staff and campers. The problem was that nobody believed it. His car had still been parked in the staff lot. His wallet had been found inside his cabin. His phone was discovered charging beside his bed. Yet, somehow, we were expected to believe he had simply decided to walk away into the woods without taking any of his belongings. Whenever anyone asked about him, the director changed the subject immediately. Eventually, people stopped talking about it, at least during the daytime. At night, it was a different story. Every counselor had heard rumors, stories about voices coming from the forest, stories about people being seen between the trees after curfew, stories about a trail that wasn't marked on any camp map, a trail that supposedly appeared only after midnight. I thought it was nonsense until I saw it myself. The summer was nearly over when it happened. One evening, I was assigned to supervise a group of older campers during an overnight wilderness program. We hiked nearly 3 miles from the main camp to a remote campsite near a small lake. The area was beautiful during the day. Tall pines, crystal clear water, absolute silence. We arrived shortly before sunset and spent the evening teaching survival skills and cooking dinner over a fire. Everything felt normal. The campers eventually settled into their tents around 10 o'clock. By 11, everyone appeared asleep. I was sitting near the dying campfire with another counselor named Brian. We were talking quietly when we noticed something strange. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no frogs, no wind, nothing. The sudden absence of sound felt unnatural. Brian noticed it too. We sat there listening to the silence for several minutes. Then we heard footsteps, not nearby, far away, deep in the woods, slow, steady, crunch, crunch. At first we assumed it was a deer, then the footsteps continued for nearly 20 minutes, always moving, never getting closer, never moving away, just circling somewhere beyond the trees. Eventually the sound stopped. Neither of us mentioned it again. The next morning, one of the campers approached me during breakfast. He looked nervous.
"Someone was outside my tent last night,"
he said. I asked if he had seen an animal. He shook his head.
"No."
What did you see? The boy hesitated. Then he said something that immediately made me uncomfortable.
"I thought it was you."
I asked what he meant.
"The person outside sounded exactly like you."
The camper claimed someone had whispered his name repeatedly during the night. The voice had sounded identical to mine. He assumed I was checking on the tents. Then he looked outside. The person wasn't standing near the entrance. They were standing behind the tent, completely motionless, watching. The camper never saw their face, only a silhouette. I figured he was exaggerating. Kids tell stories at camp. That's what they do. But over the following week, more campers reported similar experiences. Different voices, different locations, the same pattern. Someone calling their names from outside tents after dark. Always using a familiar voice. Always staying just out of sight. The camp director became increasingly irritated whenever these reports surfaced. Eventually, he gathered the counselors for a meeting. What he told us still bothers me.
"There is an old logging trail east of camp,"
he said.
"If any camper mentions finding a trail that isn't on the map, you immediately bring them back."
One counselor laughed.
"Why?"
The director didn't smile.
"Because there is no trail."
The room went silent. Then he continued.
"If you ever find one, do not follow it."
Nobody knew whether he was serious. The next week I found out. It happened during a routine afternoon hike. I was leading 8 campers through one of the designated trails near the eastern edge of camp. Halfway through the hike, one of the kids pointed into the trees.
"What's that path?"
I looked over. There was a narrow dirt trail cutting between the pines. I'd never seen it before. At first, I assumed it was an animal path. Then I noticed something strange. The ground was perfectly clear. No fallen branches, no weeds, no leaves. It looked maintained, almost recently used. The campers wanted to explore it. I immediately remembered the director's warning, so I led everyone away. That should have been the end of it. But later that night, curiosity got the better of me. Around midnight, I grabbed a flashlight and returned alone. The trail was still there, waiting. The entrance seemed wider now, more obvious, as if it wanted to be noticed. I followed it. At first it looked normal, just a narrow path winding through dense forest. Then I realized something was wrong. The woods were completely silent. Even my footsteps sounded distant somehow. The deeper I walked, the less familiar the forest became. After 20 minutes, I should have reached one of the camp boundaries. Instead, the trail continued. 30 minutes later, I saw lights ahead. My first thought was that I'd reached another campsite. Then I got closer and realized I was looking at cabins. Old cabins, dozens of them. Rotting structures hidden deep within the forest. An entire abandoned camp. I had never heard of another camp anywhere near Pine Hollow. Yet there it was, sitting in complete darkness. The buildings looked ancient. Many were collapsing. Some were covered in vines. Others appeared strangely untouched. I walked toward the nearest cabin. The door stood partially open. Inside, I found old bunk beds, rusting lanterns, children's drawings hanging on the walls. Everything appeared abandoned for decades. I suddenly heard movement outside. Footsteps, several of them. I switched off my flashlight immediately. The footsteps approached the cabin slowly, then stopped outside the doorway. I waited. The darkness felt suffocating. Eventually, a voice spoke. A familiar voice. My voice. Found it yet? My entire body froze. The voice came from directly outside, perfectly matching my own. Then another voice spoke. This one sounded like Brian. Then another. And another. Different counselors, different campers, all speaking from outside simultaneously. Some were laughing, some were whispering, some were calling my name. I couldn't see anyone. Only darkness beyond the doorway. The voices continued for several minutes, then they stopped all at once. I remained inside the cabin until sunrise. When daylight finally appeared, I stepped outside. The abandoned camp was gone. There were no cabins, no buildings, nothing. Only trees. Endless trees. I ran back toward the trail. Within 15 minutes, I reached the main camp. The problem was that nobody believed me. Not even Brian. According to him, I'd never left my cabin. He claimed he'd seen me asleep in bed at 1 a.m. The security logs backed him up. Even stranger, my flashlight was still inside my cabin, exactly where I had left it. I convinced myself I had dreamed everything. That was easier than accepting the alternative. Then summer ended. Most of the staff left. Life moved on. 3 years later, I received a message from Brian. It contained a single photograph. No explanation. No text. Just a photo. The image showed a group of children standing in front of several cabins deep in the woods. The picture looked old. Very old. Black and white. At first, I didn't understand why he had sent it. Then I noticed something. One of the counselors standing in the background was me. Not someone who looked similar. Me. Same face. Same height. Same expression. The photograph was dated August 12th, 1964. I called Brian immediately. The number was disconnected. I tried reaching him through social media. Nothing. His profiles were gone. As far as I can tell, he vanished without warning. Last month, I returned to Pine Hollow for the first time in years. The camp still operates. Most of the buildings have been renovated. New cabins, new staff, new campers. I walked through the property for nearly an hour. Everything seemed normal. Until I reached the eastern boundary. There, between the trees, I found a narrow dirt trail. A trail that doesn't appear on any map. A trail that shouldn't exist. As I stood there staring into the forest, I heard voices somewhere in the distance. Dozens of them. Children laughing, counselors talking, campfire songs echoing through the trees. It sounded like an entire camp hidden just beyond sight. The strange thing is that Pine Hollow only has one camp. At least that's what they tell people. But every now and then, usually after midnight, I still receive voice messages from unknown numbers. The recordings are always corrupted, mostly static, mostly silence, except for the very end. At the very end, someone always says the same thing, and every single time. The voice sounds exactly like mine. Come back. We're still here. My final summer working as a camp counselor was supposed to be the easiest one. By then, I had already spent 4 years working at different camps across the country. I had dealt with homesick campers, injuries, storms, wildlife encounters, and every other problem you could imagine. Nothing really surprised me anymore. At least, that's what I thought. The camp was called Cedar Ridge. It sat deep in the mountains of western Montana, surrounded by dense forest and steep cliffs. The nearest town was almost an hour away. Cell service barely existed. At night, the wilderness felt endless. The camp itself was fairly small: 6 cabins, 1 dining hall, a boathouse, an archery range, and an old observation tower built on a hill overlooking the entire property. The tower had originally been constructed as a fire lookout decades earlier. It was no longer used. The stairs had become unstable, and the upper platform was supposedly unsafe. Because of that, campers were strictly forbidden from entering. Most kids ignored it. Some became obsessed with it, especially after hearing the stories. Every camp has legends. Cedar Ridge was no different. According to local rumors, a fire lookout station there had vanished sometime in the 1970s. No body was ever found. No evidence. Nothing. The man had simply disappeared. Afterward, hikers occasionally reported seeing someone standing at the top of the tower late at night, watching the forest. The figure was always described the same way: tall, still, silent. Nobody ever saw its face. I heard those stories during orientation and immediately dismissed them. Every camp has a ghost story. This one just happened to involve an abandoned tower. The strange events started during the second week of camp. One morning, several campers arrived at breakfast looking exhausted. They claimed someone had been shining a flashlight into their cabin throughout the night. At first, we assumed it was another counselor, maybe someone doing rounds, but nobody admitted to it. The following night, the same thing happened. Then again, and again. Every night, campers reported seeing a distant light moving through the woods after midnight. The descriptions were always similar: a single white light, slowly drifting between the trees, sometimes approaching the cabins, sometimes moving toward the lake, sometimes climbing the hill where the observation tower stood. The camp director blamed hikers. The explanation made sense, at least initially. Then, one of the counselors decided to investigate. His name was Tyler. He was 24 and had the kind of personality that made him incapable of leaving mysteries alone. One night, around 1 in the morning, he grabbed a flashlight and followed the light into the woods. The next morning, he looked terrible, pale, shaken, exhausted. When we asked what happened, he refused to explain for nearly a week. Eventually, after enough pressure, he finally told us. According to Tyler, he followed the moving light all the way to the observation tower. The light climbed the stairs, slowly, 1 level at a time. Tyler assumed it was another person, until he reached the base. The stairs were empty. No hikers, no campers, nobody. Yet the light continued moving upward, floating, ascended through the tower by itself. Tyler left immediately after seeing that. None of us believed him. Not completely, but he never joked about it, never exaggerated, never changed his story. And after that night, he refused to go near the tower again. A few days later, something happened that made the entire camp uneasy. One of the younger campers disappeared. Counselors searched everywhere: cabins, trails, the lake, the dining hall. Nothing. Then one of the staff members spotted him walking down the hill near the observation tower, alone, calm, almost confused. When asked where he'd been, he gave a strange answer.
I was talking to the man up there.
The counselors exchanged nervous looks.
What man? The one in the tower.
The boy pointed toward the hill.
He wanted to know why nobody visits anymore.
The director immediately ended the conversation. The child was sent back to activities. The rest of us were told not to discuss it. That only made things worse. The rumors spread through camp within hours. Campers started claiming they could see someone standing inside the tower at night. Some swore they saw a silhouette watching the cabins. Others reported hearing footsteps on the stairs despite nobody being there. By the third week, even counselors were becoming uncomfortable. Then the photographs started appearing. The first photo was found taped to the dining hall door. Nobody knew where it came from. The image showed the observation tower, taken at night. At first glance, it looked normal. Then someone noticed a figure standing inside the upper platform, watching the camera. The photo was old. The paper was yellowed, the edges damaged. Yet the tower in the image looked exactly as it did now. The second photograph appeared 2 days later. This one showed several campers sitting around a campfire. The problem was that none of us recognized the children. Their clothing looked decades out of date. The campfire location no longer existed, and standing in the background was the same figure from the tower, watching. The camp director collected both photos. He never explained them. Then, during the final week of camp, I saw the light myself. I couldn't sleep that night. Around 2 a.m, I noticed a faint glow moving through the trees outside my cabin window. At first, I assumed it was another counselor. Then I realized the light wasn't bobbing the way a flashlight should. It was gliding, smoothly, silently. I watched it move toward the hill, toward the observation tower. For reasons I still don't understand, I decided to follow it. The forest was cold and unusually quiet. The light remained visible ahead of me the entire time, always just far enough away. Eventually, I reached the tower. The stairs creaked as the wind moved through them. The structure looked older than I remembered, almost decayed. The light drifted upward, level after level, until it reached the observation deck. Then it stopped. I climbed after it. The higher I went, the more uneasy I became. Halfway up, I considered turning around, but curiosity kept pulling me forward. When I finally reached the top, the light vanished, gone. The platform was empty, nothing but darkness surrounding the forest. I stood there alone for several seconds. Then I noticed something carved into the wooden railing. Names. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands. Layer upon layer. Some recent, some impossibly old. Campers, counselors, staff, years dating back decades. Then I found a name I recognized. Tyler. Carved into the wood. Fresh. As if it had been done recently. The problem was that Tyler had left camp 3 days earlier. Or at least that's what everyone believed. As I stared at the carving, I heard footsteps climbing the stairs below me. Slow. Deliberate. I called out. No answer. The footsteps continued, one step at a time, getting closer. I assumed it was another counselor, until I looked over the railing. Nobody was there. The staircase was empty, yet the sound continued. Closer, 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 until it reached the platform, then stopped directly behind me. I turned around. Nothing. But someone had carved a new name into the railing. A name that hadn't been there seconds earlier. My name. I ran. I don't remember descending the stairs. I only remember reaching the bottom and sprinting back toward camp. The next morning, I returned with 2 other counselors. The carving was still there. My name. Fresh. Deep. Impossible to miss. The director ordered us never to speak about it. That same afternoon, I packed my belongings and left. I never returned to Cedar Ridge. When I left that summer, I promised myself I was done with the place forever. For years, I kept that promise. Life moved on. The memories faded. At least, I thought they had. Then, a few months ago, I received an email from an address that didn't exist. No subject, no message, just a photograph. It showed the observation tower. Someone was standing at the top, watching the forest. The image was too blurry to identify the figure, but something about it felt familiar. I deleted the email. A few weeks later, another photograph arrived. This one had been taken from the tower itself, looking down at the camp. The strange thing was that the camp wasn't abandoned in the picture. Children walked between cabins. Smoke rose from the dining hall. Everything looked alive. And standing in the middle of the field was a counselor wearing my uniform, looking directly at the camera. After that, the photographs kept coming. Always Cedar Ridge. Always impossible. Then they suddenly stopped. For months. I thought it was over. Last week, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a photograph of my house, taken at night. The timestamp showed the previous evening. I checked my security cameras. Nobody had been there. 2 days later, another envelope arrived. This time, the photograph showed my backyard, and in the distance, barely visible among the trees, stood the same shadowy figure from the camp photos, watching. Yesterday, another envelope arrived. I haven't opened it. It's sitting on my kitchen table right now, waiting. Maybe it's another picture of my property. Maybe it's something worse. All I know is that every time I walk past it, I get the same feeling I had standing in that tower years ago. The feeling that someone is very close and getting closer.